Well, good morning, everyone. It's clear we are in a state of emergency with COVID-19 in Minnesota. The numbers are grim. The situation is dire. The number of deaths are increasing at an alarming rate. The number of hospitalizations are increasing at an alarming rate. I think it's because those facts are so clear that for the first time that we're going into special session, I don't anticipate the Senate Republicans or the House Republicans to move to deprive the governor of his emergency powers in the manner that they have before. And I think that's because they recognize that we are in a state of emergency and that the situation is dire. The governor needs all the tools in the toolbox to try to get this virus under control. We have already lost too many Minnesotans. And, I hear my Republican colleagues in the Senate talk about the average age of the people that we're losing being older, as though that makes it any less tragic that we're losing lives to COVID-19. And when we look at the reasonable restrictions that the governor has put into place, there's certainly public health experts and emergency room doctors that would like him to go much, much further. But until we have a president and a national plan that can provide some more economic assistance, I think the governor is doing the best he can to balance between public health and economic health. Those things are related. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to get some federal support for Minnesotans, as it looks like, unfortunately, that this pandemic is going to get a lot worse in Minnesota and nationwide before it gets any better. I heard Senator Gazelka talking on Minnesota Public Radio this morning, and I heard him talking about Thanksgiving. And, it struck me that he said, how do you decide who to invite to Thanksgiving dinner? We want people to be healthy so they can all get together for Thanksgiving dinner next year. And we want every seat at the table filled with our loved ones at Thanksgiving next year. And so we might have to make some sacrifices this year to make sure that's the reality that each of us can have in our families. With that, I'll turn it over to the Majority Leader.
Good morning. The situation that Minnesota faces did not have to be so dire. We could have had cooperation at every step of the way to spread the same message to all Minnesotans about the importance of social distancing, avoiding large crowds, wearing masks, practicing basic public health safety standards. But we entered into a campaign year in which safety, public health, and the lives of Minnesotans and Americans became a partisan issue. That did not have to happen. If we are in a situation today in which Republicans are willing to leave the governor's emergency powers in place and recognize the situation that we face as a state, and that the challenging, dangerous, and deadly weeks that are in front of us, we may be on the road to the first unified response to COVID-19 since March of this year. We should be hopeful that we are on that path, but it has taken far too long to get there. Nationally, Congress, Republican Senate needs to step up and provide emergency economic relief to the states and to the businesses and individuals, the renters, the homeowners, all the people who are suffering financially because of this pandemic. It is inexcusable that our federal government has not reauthorized the support that they provided last summer. If you have a business that is failing, if you have mounting rent backlog coming up, it is because people in Washington, D.C., specifically a Republican Senate and a Republican president, have failed to step up to do their job to help you. COVID-19 is deadly. The state's response is the only possible place that we could be right now. And it's time for us to put aside the political advantages of arguing against basic public health standards. It's time to provide economic relief to all Americans. It's time for Republicans to join us in fighting COVID-19. It didn't have to be as bad as this winter is going to be, and it's time for us to do much better.
Okay. We're happy to take your questions.
Yep, you can post the questions in the chat or just post to be called on.
Hi. Can Mary go? I think I went in line. Yeah. if I could get the House leaders to react to what we're hearing from the Senate today, and that there may be a new Senate president installed in case Senator Klobuchar gets an appointment with the Biden administration. What do you make of all of that? And if there is a special election in the Senate, how does that look?
Oh, that wacky Minnesota Senate. I don't know. Majority Leader, did you have any comment?
Yeah, people are dying and they're playing parlor games. It's irresponsible.
I think that there's a lot of things that happen in the Minnesota Senate that we don't have any part in, and it doesn't benefit the world for us to comment on them.
What about the real prospect, though, that control of the chamber could be at stake? That certainly affects you. And if there is a special election in either Senator Miller's seat or Senator Tomassoni's seat, that would certainly affect maybe Democrats' ability to try to take back control of that.
At this point, these are hypothetical questions, all of them, that affect actions that could happen far into the future and past the December special session. So I think it's all a little bit premature. And I think the Majority Leader is right. Really, the reason we're being called in today is to determine whether or not the governor should continue to have the emergency powers pursuant to Minnesota law. And the answer is yes, the governor should continue to have the emergency powers, and the rest of that does look a little bit like games.
All right, next question, Peter Callahan, go ahead.
Hi, hey, so what do you do today? Just come in, pray, salute the flag, and adjourn? Is there anything that you have to do?
Well, we're hearing that there's some move by a couple of House GOP members to try to put something in front of the body. I would say if that's a serious proposal, I would have expected that the Minority Leader would have raised it with me, with the Senate leadership, both Republican and Democrat. We are on a text chain, the four of us together. We have plenty of Zoom time. And so I don't think that that is a serious proposal. I think that is an attempt to get press coverage for the individuals bringing the motion forward. And if they are serious about having a conversation, I am more than happy to schedule hearings and to work through any proposed legislation that people want to think about.
And can I follow up with the Majority Leader? I mean, if the Rs and the DFL is on the same page regarding emergency powers, do you think that's a change of heart, or do you think they just realized how horrible the optics would be today if they were to do that, and that the issue just comes back in December or January if the COVID numbers improve?
Peter, I think that's a question for their own conscience, not mine to speculate on.
Well, but you were optimistic a few minutes ago that you're all on the same page now. Why would you be optimistic as opposed to feel it's a cynical response?
I don't really care about their feelings on the topic. I care about their actions on behalf of Minnesotans. So if they are willing to come to the table and actually let the governor do his job and work with us, this would be a first step to indicate that. But it's the actions that count. It's the actions that will save lives and businesses. It isn't their internal motivations.
Okay, thanks.
Kevin Featherly had asked about the GOP bill on emergency powers, but I think the speaker addressed that already. So next is Ricardo Lopez.
Hi. So I was wondering if you could walk us through with how sort of the response here to COVID looks like from the legislative end going forward. I mean, obviously we've got a budget deficit that the legislature has addressed, but also, what sort of state level support is being discussed for things like rental assistance. I know the governor has indicated that one of the reasons he isn't turning the dial back more on restrictions on businesses because there isn't more aid coming at the federal level. So what discussions are being had at the state level to help prop up businesses, to help people who have lost their jobs because of the pandemic? I mean, what can you do given the budget situation right now, and what does that look like in the next 2 months?
Well, that is the key issue, is what will the federal government provide in terms of assistance? Because what we know is that states are constrained in their spending by the constitutional requirement that we balance our budget. So we cannot deficit spend, we cannot use debt to pay for things that are going on in the state. And we have a projected budget deficit of $4.7 billion. Now, collections are $800 million above what was projected when we got that number. So we may be around the $3.9 billion deficit number, but that is still an incredibly large number when you look at the fact that we have $2.5 billion in reserves. So we do not have the money to provide assistance to every Minnesota business and worker who needs assistance right now. We need federal help in order to do that.
We also have state resources that we could bring to the table. And there are a lot of Minnesotans who are doing extremely well, even during the pandemic. And so having a conversation about how to bring resources to the table to help people who are struggling from people who have enough to spare is also something we need to be considering here. We have a COVID division of pain that is much like our economic division of pain, where there are haves and have-nots, and we can't continue to do it that way. So, certainly Minnesota has a lot more resources we could bring to bear if we had the political will to do it. Germany, for example, is paying restaurants to stay closed because it is dangerous, and they want to keep those businesses and not make those individual business owners pay the price. We need stronger collective action as a state and a nation to both fight the pandemic and preserve people's lifelong investments in small businesses and life savings and all the other things that people have invested and built over time in an unfair economy. We actually collectively need to step in and do much more to help them at the state and at the federal level. But the question is whether we have the political will to actually meet this moment.
So to follow up, just because I want to get a sense of whether, today's special session will be a one-day deal, and then you maybe come back next month and address anything that comes up between now and then. But are you expecting to adjourn today, or what's the plan in terms of how long this special session is?
Yes, I expect both the House and the Senate will adjourn today. I haven't not had a direct conversation with Senator Gazelka about that, but all of his public comments lead me to believe that it'll be a one-day session in both the House and the Senate.
Great, thank you.
Okay, next up is Esme Murphy.
Hi there. Just had a question. Is the governor doing enough, or are you hearing from anybody in your caucuses or your caucus that he should be doing more, that there should be tighter restrictions, that there maybe, amped up restrictions?
I think the governor is providing strong and balanced leadership. And the two people who seem to me to be advising him the most closely are our health commissioner, Jan Malcolm, and our deed commissioner, Steve Grove. And those two individuals inspire a lot of confidence in the people, from the people of Minnesota, because they're consummate professionals who take seriously the responsibilities they have that are a little bit in conflict, right? Commissioner Grove's job is to look at the economic health of Minnesota businesses and workers, and Commissioner Malcolm's job is to look at Minnesotans' health. And these things are a little bit in conflict right now. I think the governor is getting very good advice and picking a balanced approach forward. I know that there are emergency room physicians and other medical professionals that are frustrated and would like to see more. I know there are nurses who are fatigued and think that the public just doesn't get it and doesn't care about them because they're not consistently wearing masks or wearing them properly. I think that I don't envy the governor's position right now. There are no good answers for dealing with a pandemic. This is a once in 100-year event, and it's colossal in terms of its impact on every aspect of our lives. And so no matter what decisions the governor will make, it will be easy for people to find things that they will complain he could have done differently. But I think he's doing a good job of balancing. I think we've seen a colossal failure of leadership over there in the Dakotas, and it's, we have the highest death rate per capita in North Dakota and South Dakota on the entire planet. Those are not really good neighbors at this point.
Also, the governor could tighten up restrictions, but if we continue to see resistance from community leaders and from political leaders around the state fanning the flames of this anti-mask lunacy, there's only so much the governor can do. It requires cooperation. And so we need a much more unified voice coming from all leaders in the state and all leaders in the nation about the importance of actually following through on the restrictions that we have. Compliance needs to be much higher. And so, the governor can order lots of things, but if people are resisting because of, some political act of defiance that is causing people to die, there's only so much a governor can do. So I think What I was said when I was hopeful that Republicans won't take up the emergency powers vote, I hope they will start listening and repeating the same messages back in their own communities about the importance of taking this seriously.
Okay, Theo Keith is up next.
Hello, the governor just said in his executive council meeting that we're going to have 7,200 new cases today. I guess this is a cynical view, but the cynical view seems to be winning right now. Is that just inevitable to continue given the division that's out there over what to do?
No, it's not inevitable. It's a choice. And we see in countries around the world better and worse management of this pandemic. And it goes better when there's a clear and consistent public health message that people are abiding by. And our behavior will make a difference. Each of us individually can make a difference. But the signals that people are getting, as the majority leader is talking about from some political leaders, is very harmful. You only have to look at the president's actions leading up to the election and look at the events in Bemidji and Duluth. And look, I don't want it to be political, but when you have a political leader who has the power to influence human behavior in the way that a president does, and the way that he chooses to use that power leads to death, I think we have to call that out. 2,790 Minnesotans dying from this epidemic wasn't inevitable. It is in part a choice. And we can make a different choice going forward. I think we all want the children to be in school. I think we want that to be a safe place for our teachers and our educational professionals to work. But if we really want that, we've got to be serious about stopping the community spread. And it is within our power to do that.
It's especially true since many of the things that we are asking people to do are not that onerous. It is not that hard to wear a mask. It is not that hard to stay home if you can. It is not that hard to socially distance. And we are right now reaping the bad behavior of a month ago. The question is, how bad is it going to be a month from now? We have the choice now to make this better. And so none of it is inevitable, but it's all lagging. So the reality that we face is based on past actions. Our winter is going to be dependent on what we're doing now. And Minnesota has to get much more on top of this. We have essentially an invasion coming from the Dakotas, and we need to do everything we can to stop it.
One quick follow-up, because you guys got doctors and teachers in your caucus. We keep hearing the last couple of weeks that the biggest concern is staffing. Schools can't find enough substitute teachers, and a bunch of hospital staff is off the job. Anybody coming with any ideas on how to solve that outside of getting a handle on the crisis? I mean, like in the short term, anybody coming with ideas on how to solve that?
The administration is working very hard on these staffing issues and getting training for National Guard soldiers to be able to help in the long-term care industry in particular. I know we have an incoming nurse in our new member class, Liz Bolden down in Rochester, who isn't a bedside nurse right now, but is prepared to be called up to do that kind of work because of the shortage. So there's a lot of conversation, and I expect that will be a topic that we spend a lot of time on between now and the December special session in the event there's anything we can do to assist. But to go back a little bit to Esme's question and in response to your question, we don't need an executive order to do better. So there are Minnesotans who can stay home, and they should. Minnesotans don't need Governor Tim Walz to put forth stricter executive orders in order to have an impact on the course of this disease. We can choose to do that. We can choose to ignore political leaders and listen to public health professionals and have a positive impact on the trajectory of this disease.
Okay, next up is Kevin Featherly.
Majority Leader Winkler, I'm wondering how difficult the challenge was to your majority leader status last week. And you know, we don't know. I don't know what the vote came down to. I don't know how divided the caucus was. But what does that challenge suggest about what how it will be to manage the new DFL House majority going forward?
Well, we have a tighter majority, and that means that we have to be more unified as a caucus. We certainly did a very good job of bringing our team together and working very closely on bold legislation in 2019, and we've stayed very close together in dealing with the pandemic. So I think a little bit of challenge is healthy, and I don't have any concerns about that. And I think our team is ready to go to handle this pandemic, handle this economic situation, this budget situation. And I expect that we are stronger as a result of this last week.
Can you say what the vote was on that? I have no idea how divided the caucus was.
Nobody does, Kevin. It's a secret ballot.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next question is from Dana Ferguson. Have you considered tighter COVID-19 related protocols for the 2021 legislative session? Will the legislature look pretty similar to what we've seen the past few months?
Things won't change much from what you have seen. We have pretty public health oriented COVID-19 protocols already in place. I continue to implore members and staff to wear masks at all times, to socially distance and to wash their hands. We have some physical changes to the House floor to protect the front desk staff. I'll be meeting with our HVAC professionals and industrial hygienists over the coming weeks to figure out how many people can be safe in each of the rooms that we have, and to really have a good understanding of air exchange in each of the rooms, and whether there are physical modifications we need to make to the HVAC system to ensure that the House floor remains a safe place for people to work.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think, give it a couple more seconds here, but otherwise we can wrap it up.
Yeah, just to conclude on kind of launching from Dana's question, just because we will be in contact by Zoom and by telephone and by text and by email doesn't mean we won't be in contact. So we're having a Zoom press conference here. We probably have more participation from some parts of the state because we're doing it by Zoom. So I want you to know that the legislature is fully open for full engagement with Minnesotans. And just as I now have cocktails with my children via Zoom, we talk just as much as we ever did, but it's over Zoom. We can do that in our governing process as well. So Minnesotans' voices are welcome, and we will be very open and available, just in a different format than the in-person format. And I don't know, Ryan, if you had some closing comments.
It looks like there's one more question. And obviously, we're all trying to manage through this pandemic, and we will continue to do the best we can. And, it's not ideal. None of this is, but the legislature will get its job done.
Yep. Tim Pugmire, you get the last question. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks. Following up to Dana's question, Speaker, you had put out an RFP about some voting technology upgrades. Any progress on that? Anything to report?
Yes, I think we'll be testing part of it today. I think when members' names are read, their light might light up, and so we might get a total from the machine today. We'll be running some testing through December, but what we need is we need a secure way for members to vote remotely, so that I can be sure the individual who is voting is the member who's been elected to the legislature, and not their spouse and not their child and not a member of their staff, but that individual and that individual only. So we've been using call of the roll to verify that it is the members of the Minnesota House of Representatives who are voting. There are other ways that are secure to ensure that only legislators who've been duly elected by the people of Minnesota are voting. And we hopefully should have that up and running by the time we start in January.
And so this would speed up the process, hopefully.
It would, though. There is a benefit of calling the roll. It's kind of like an adult timeout when the debate gets a little heated. So having easier voting maybe means having more conflict back, and some people will enjoy that and some people will not. The majority leader raises his hand at this moment. Go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, no, I was just pointing out that, I think having a full and robust debate on the House floor is a great way to air out differences.
And I'll just add that I think that we can have full and robust debate in spaces that are more productive than the House floor, but that performance art might be coming back into high form with the speeding up of the voting.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
I don't have any evidence that dogs have been voting. See you.